Great, thank you. Thank you, Gil, for that, and thank you, Barbara, for making this happen. It's really exciting for me to be here in Chicago to talk about some of the work that we're doing as part of the Jezreel Valley Regional Project. And I understand that the program has been very successful so far. Many of my colleagues from Israel have been here in the past, and hopefully some of you have seen some of those lectures before. And so I hope I can live up to their standards today when we talk about Armageddon. And of course, I put Armageddon in the title just to get you in here. Clicker here. How many of you came just because Armageddon was in the title? Nice, good. So I got you two extra. So I'll pay out a little bit here. I'll let the concept of Armageddon kind of bookend what we'll talk about today. And the word Armageddon is something that you're probably very familiar with, and you probably know, or maybe you don't, but here it is. It occurs one time in the New Testament, and here it is. And I'll get my best Bible voice on for you and read it for you. This is from Revelation, the book of, chapter 16, 12 through 16. The sixth angel poured his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up in order to prepare the way for the kings from the east. And I saw three foul spirits like frogs coming from the mouth of the dragon, from the mouth of the beast, and from the mouth of the false prophet. These are demonic spirits performing signs who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. And they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. This is a unique reference. In fact, what it almost certainly represents is a Greek corruption of the Hebrew Har Megiddo, the hill of Megiddo. And I'll mention Megiddo again in just a little bit, but suffice it to say Megiddo is a major archaeological site in Israel that has a major Bronze and Iron Age presence. And of course, for those of you who visit the museum galleries here, you've probably seen many Megiddo artifacts, including the famous ivories. In any case, what this text is doing is it's telling us that the penultimate battle of good versus evil at the end of the world is going to take place at this archaeological site. And I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, because I think I'll give you enough information today that will help you figure out why these weird New Testament guys would have situated the penultimate battle at Megiddo. Because by the time they were writing this, in fact, Megiddo was abandoned as the site of Megiddo, and the name Megiddo had been detached from the site itself. So keep this in mind, and at the end, if you're still awake, we can talk a little bit about why Megiddo fulfills this role. Okay, hopefully many of you know where Israel is. East Coast Mediterranean. Megiddo is here in the northern part of Israel, just on the north side of the border with Palestine today, located in the valley of Jezreel. Now, the Jezreel Valley is very important, as Gil already indicated, for its geographical setting. The tectonic situation of Western Asia has created this massive mountain system that is very much running in a north-south direction here. The Rift Valley and its separation is kind of forming this as well. So it's really easy to go north and south most of the time. You can go up and down the coast. You can go up and down the Jordan Valley. But crossing from east to west is a little bit more difficult. And so finding the least path of resistance is, of course, humans' nature. And one of the best places to do this happens to be here, not far from the modern cities of Akko and Haifa in the Valley of Jezreel. And you can get a good sense of this from this image on the right, where you get a little bit of a sense of the topography here. Megiddo and the Jezreel Valley become a hub of international roads. And once you're inside the valley, you have access to these roads that will take you anywhere else in the ancient Near East that you need to go, whether it's heading westward and down to Egypt, or down centrally to the hill country of Samaria and Jerusalem, or up to the north to the Phoenician coast, or inland to the Jordan Valley by a number of routes, and then onward to Damascus, Mesopotamia, and so on. So Megiddo's long-lived history pretty much continuously occupied from, say, 5000 BC up to the modern day is based on the fact that it is here commanding this hub of roads. Here you see an image showing you the famous Via Maris route, which is a route that existed for thousands of years, but was really codified with this term Via Maris in the Roman period. And it's essentially a primary route from Egypt to Mesopotamia, and all the stops along the way by way of the Jezreel Valley and Megiddo. So everybody who was going anywhere remotely interesting in the ancient world passed by Megiddo and hopefully left some cool stuff for the archaeologists. All right, this image again for you. Here in red, we've marked the Roman road for you. The Romans really just codified the road system that was already more or less in place, or at least the traditional road system, for thousands of years. And one of the main roads through the valley was sponsored by the empire itself and ran from Caesarea on the coast, through the mountains, past Megiddo and on to Beit Shan, and so forth. And here you're looking at a close-up view of the Megiddo area itself, with Tel Megiddo located here, and in red, the main Roman road, more or less as we understand it today. What I really like about this opportunity to talk to you about Legio is that it helps us to better contextualize Megiddo itself. You know, many of us who work in the ancient Near East and many of those who go and visit sites in the Near East are typically have horse blinders on to those big tell structures on the landscape. You know, Megiddo is this huge artificial hill, and archaeologists have been attracted there for centuries. Tourists are attracted there, but what we don't realize usually is that the site itself is much larger. So if this is Tel Megiddo today, the national park itself, with a parking lot and a visitor center here. The building of the visitor center is actually built by the University of Chicago, by the way. It's still in place. But the actual extent of archaeological remains from all periods is much larger. I have a graphic for you. All of this is where we can find archaeological remains. And this is probably a very conservative drawing for you. So one of the aims of my project has been the Jezreel Valley Regional Project to kind of emphasize parts of sites that are typically neglected because of our obsession with these visible sites on the landscape. We've been doing this for 100 years. We've done it in Egypt. What were the first major sites to be excavated? Where those giant pointy rocks are sticking out of the Giza Plateau, right? We've excavated all the way around it and then realized, oh, there's a bunch of other sites you can't actually see. So this is part of a process of the entire discipline trying to correct for these foci. In any case, there's quite a bit of material here, which ranges from all different periods, and we'll be focusing on the Roman period in particular. I like to refer to this area as Greater Megiddo, so we still get to use the name Megiddo for fundraising purposes, because nobody knows what Legio is. But in short, Legio is the term that we generally use to refer to the Roman Legionary base that was somewhere in this area in the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. And if we look at Greek and Latin sources, we get an idea of the types of places that were located somewhere here in the vicinity of Tel Megiddo. We know that there's a Jewish village called Caparcotani. We know that there's a Roman legionary base, which goes by the name Legio. And we also know that in the Byzantine period, a major polis was established here called Maximianopolis, named after Constantine's co-emperor Maximian. We also have early Islamic sources and later Islamic sources and even modern sources that refer to a place called Legion. And this is in fact our first clue to the location of the Roman legionary base, because this name is not in fact Arabic, but is preserving the ancient Latin Legio. The village of Legion, which was occupied already probably in the 7th and 8th centuries AD, continued to be occupied right up into the very early 20th century. In fact, the earliest excavators at the site of Megiddo, who you'll meet in just a moment, talk about some of the villagers from Legion coming to steal stones from the dig site and so on. In any case, from the Arabic name, we were able to determine, as others have before us, that somewhere in this greater vicinity is the ancient Roman legionary base. As far as Caparcotani, the Jewish village, it is Greekified into the word Caparcotani and does in fact appear on a couple of maps and geographical sources. Here you're looking at the Peutinger map, which is a 5th century map that probably has some earlier data on it. And here you see the Mediterranean here. North is off to your right. Caesarea, Caparcotani, Scythopolis, Beit Shan, more or less representing the same road that I've illustrated for you over here. All right. A brief historical overview that will contextualize some of the things that we're going to talk about, in particular how and why a Roman legion would be stationed in this area at all. Of course, Tel Megiddo itself is the main center for the Bronze, Iron Age, and Hellenistic remains there. As with many sites in Israel and other parts of the Levant, by the time the Hellenistic period rolls around and larger cities are needed to be built, and Greeks and Romans are a lot lazier, they don't want to go up to the top of these big tells and establish new cities, they tend to establish cities in the flat areas next to tells. And the same seems to be true here today. So Tel Megiddo itself really only goes into the Hellenistic period, and there are, of course, little over 2,000 years of history at Megiddo afterwards. The most important period that we're interested in right now is what we call the early and middle Roman period, the first 3 centuries CE. And in particular, we are interested in this series of revolts that took place, beginning in 67 to 70 CE with the First Revolt, which of course was the revolt of the local Jewish population against the Roman Empire in the area. And they were very interested in regaining their independence, particularly in a cultic level, but also in a nationalist level as well. They started out the revolt, didn't go so well, went well for a little bit, but it ended up not being successful. And in 70, the Romans marched on Jerusalem and destroyed the temple and so on. The main result from our point of view today is that as a result, the Romans decided to station the Xth Legion in Jerusalem permanently to prevent against further revolts. It didn't work out because there were a number of other revolts that kept breaking out. In particular, the famous Diaspora Revolt, which happened all over the Mediterranean world, but also in the region of Israel from 115 to 117. The result of that was the bringing in of yet another legion, and somewhere into the north. We know that the Second Triana Legion was brought here for some amount of time, and then the Sixth Ferrata Legion was stationed here to replace them permanently around 120. These dates are a little bit uncertain, plus or minus 5 or 6 years. Another revolt broke out, the famous Bar Kokhba Revolt, or the Second Revolt, in 132 to 136, and of course not successful again. The Roman Empire was able to maintain hold. But even after this revolt, the Roman Sixth Legion was still present all the way up until the reign of Constantine in the Megiddo area somewhere. The location of the legionary base, there were only about 5 of us who really wanted to know where the base was, but let's pretend like the whole world of scholarship was waiting for somebody to find us. The location of the base was really not known, and for a lot of people who were interested in Roman-Jewish relations and the Roman revolts, most scholars of those periods were very interested in understanding the Xth Legion, which was in Jerusalem. And today, archaeology of the Xth Legion is difficult because it's a modern living city, and the legionary base for the Xth Legion was probably located somewhere in what is now the western side of the old city. So as kind of a secondary desire to study the Roman Legion in this particular region, there's an opportunity to find the Sixth Legion in the Megiddo area. And as I've already said, the name of Legion already gave us one of the main clues. There's been a lot of work in this area over the years. You have a very long list here, which you can commit to memory as you see fit. One of the first, the pioneers of archaeology of Megiddo and in fact, Greater Megiddo, was this fellow Gottlieb Schumacher, who worked on behalf of the German Society for Oriental Research in the early 20th century. Don't let his name and affiliation fool you. He was from Ohio. His parents were German immigrants, but he still got to keep the cool name, I suppose. And what he worked all over Israel, doing a lot of different things, and you may have heard of his name before in other contexts. But what he did at Megiddo was really kind of bad. At Tel Megiddo itself, he was responsible for this giant gash through the center here. And where Chicago and now our excavations understand that there are about 35 major strata, he found 4. So that gives you a sense of the resolution of his methodology. But in any case, we will blame him for that if we have to have a lecture on Tel Megiddo. We're going to give him credit here tonight because he did something that's very valuable for us today. Here is the map that he produced. Tel Megiddo is here, and he did a very detailed survey of the area around Megiddo. He understood the concept of Greater Megiddo, even though scholarship has since kind of ignored that for the Tel itself. And in a lot of ways, his survey and unfortunately, sometimes as minimal as simple red dots on the map remain the only record for some of the antiquities that were still standing in the early 20th century, most of which are completely gone today due to looting in the teens and 20s primarily. In any case, this map you see on the right is supposed to mirror image this modern aerial photograph today. And so you can see that in addition to the tell, there's quite a bit of activity in the southern area here. I put in a lot of extra slides, so if I skip some because I changed my mind in the middle, don't panic. Here's some images from the teens and 20s of the Megiddo area. In particular, these are of the village of Legion, which is located right in this area, showing you that there is in fact quite a bit of Roman and Byzantine remains, well, that were there at that time. And these are some of the earliest clues that we had for the possibility of finding the legionary base. Over the last century or so, a lot of circumstantial evidence, not even circumstantial, just small pieces of evidence have risen up from Greater Megiddo that helped us in present times to try to find the legionary base. In particular, you see this beautiful sculpted lion. This probably dates to the 2nd century AD. It was found in this larger field to the south of Tel Megiddo. If any of you have been to Israel, to the Rockefeller Museum, this lion has now, it's kind of sad yet beautiful at the same time. They ran a water pipe through its mouth, and it's now part of the fountain in the middle of the Rockefeller Museum. But it belongs here at Megiddo. Other finds, a few of these cremation burials are found, and as some of you probably know, cremation was a Roman practice in this particular time period. So we know, or we suspect, based on this, that there are Romans floating around here in one way or another. In the 20s, the British built a police station just on the south side of Greater Megiddo here, and in preparation conducted some very modest salvage excavations. In fact, those salvage excavations weren't even known about to current scholarship until my colleague Yotam Tepper, who I'll tell you about in just a moment, went into the archives and found these. But you can see just from this image, there's Tel Megiddo in the north, and if you see these big piles of dirt right here, those are the big piles of dirt that the University of Chicago used their giant railway system to dump off the side of the Tel. That's not a criticism. I'm showing you that Chicago impacted the landscape here, and it's really quite impressive. It's not laughing. It's that wrong audience. Anyway, so here's the prison, the police station in the south, and you see that there are remains here. This particular stone door was found in the first, to some extent, first, second, and third centuries. A lot of wealthier Jewish tombs had stone doors with inscriptions on them. For those of you who heard of Beit Shiarim, which is not far away from here, this is a typical kind of burial for this period. This one is nice because it mentions this fellow, Ephraim Bar Shimon, with a Hebrew script written with Samaritan, in Samaritan. So we know that at Kfar Odnai, Jewish Samaritans were living, and here's a nice piece of archaeology to go with that. We don't have to go over all of these, but Kfar Odnai, the Jewish village, is referenced 4-ish times in the rabbinic literature, without a lot of detail. You can read those all later if you want, but Ephraim Bar Shimon is part of this context here. So it seems likely on the basis of that tomb and some of the archaeology that at least part of Kfar Odnai is located here underneath the British police station, which now serves as a modern prison. My colleague Yotam Tepper, who is one of the co-directors of this particular excavation at Legio, conducted a number of surveys in the late 80s and 90s, and as part of the surveys he collected a lot of Roman pottery from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries, including these lovely roof tiles, at least one of which had a partial stamp referring to the Roman 6th Legion. This doesn't give us the exact location of the base, but the clues are mounting up. These are very nice water pipes that were found in the 30s, eroded from the area next to the road here, typical Roman style. One of the most dramatic clues, and some of you may have heard about this before, came from more recent excavations in the modern prison today. For good or ill, the prison needed expanding, and of course they called in the archaeologists, because it's Israel and there's archaeology everywhere, to check out where they're going to build this new, whatever it is they were going to build. My colleague Yotam was brought in to do that work, and he worked there for 2 very short seasons. You have to get him here to tell the stories, because he was actually working with the prisoners who were there as labor. They had to set up metal detectors because coins kept disappearing from the excavation. In any case, he did confirm that the Jewish village of Caparcotani was here under the prison. And what was really unique about the village is that the archaeological remains demonstrated that there wasn't just a Jewish village. There were Romans there, Roman pagans, as we'll see in just a moment, incipient Christians. There were civilians and soldiers and so on. It was a very dynamic and diverse little village. Here's some of the excavations as conducted, and just showing you some of the items that came out of his excavations, in some cases from the same building, showing Roman remains, including the Lares deity, bronze deity figurines, and then things like this, Jewish ritual vessels, which are known otherwise only from exclusive Jewish villages. The find, which he got a lot of fame for, very happy for him, was in his area Q, and it was this large building here. In fact, this is the building here, and what we're most interested in is this back room here, which had a very nicely preserved mosaic in it, dating to about the 3rd century AD. And the inscription, the mosaic inscriptions themselves are very interesting, and of course, they indicate to us that this was somehow a public building that residents of the village could contribute funds toward to beautify. And in this case, we have 3 inscriptions which refer to supporting the construction of mosaics here. The so-called women's inscription, which is up here, and my favorite, in fact. Remember Pramila and Kyriaka and Dorothea, oh, and Cresty. Don't you love that? Why does she get it at the end with this like little extra like nib? Over here we have the dedication by Gaianus, also called Periphereus, a centurion. Our brother has made the payment at his own expense as an act of liberality. Brutius has carried out the work. So here we have a Roman centurion has also participated in this, which doesn't sound surprising by itself until you consider the 3rd inscription. The God-loving Ekeptus has offered the table, probably referring to this thing here, to God, Jesus Christ, as a memorial. And this is the earliest archaeological reference to Jesus Christ outside of the New Testament. And so it's, of course, a very important find in itself. And it has some of the early traditional iconography, including some of the earliest fishes. And if we reconstruct the building for you, you can kind of get a sense that what we're talking about here are some of these buildings that the early church fathers, the very early church fathers are referring to, or that Paul is referring to himself, these houses that are acting as community centers of sorts in which some of these early Christian rituals are taking place, including probably the agape meal, which is probably what the table stood for itself. So once again, we have a really remarkable piece of evidence for diversity here in Greater Megiddo, that is somehow connected to the Roman legionary base as well, as we will get to, which we have a centurion paying for a mosaic that is very clearly dedicated to Jesus Christ in the 3rd century. This is before Constantine's reforms. If you listen to all the church fathers, they're telling you that the Romans are doing nothing but killing every single Christian in the universe. This is another piece of evidence as modern scholarship is starting to show that this is not exactly the case, and pogroms against early Christians are perhaps, if not overstated, not as prolific as the early fathers would tell you. Another piece of evidence, roads. Romans loved roads and were very happy that they invented the idea of the mile marker. We all know about mile markers today. What they were very nice to do for us in the ancient Roman period was to tell you how many miles you were away from a particular place, and to also put the emperor's name on it. So from an archaeological point of view, you know exactly what time period you're talking about. And if we study mile markers from the greater region, and we select all of those that refer to a place called Legio, we actually have enough to triangulate back by Roman miles to about the area of Megiddo today. In short, all of the pieces of evidence that have accumulated over the last century that I've kind of summarized for you today suggest that the best place to look for a Roman legionary base might be in this area here. And this is how we began our project, which ultimately ended up in some excavation, as we will see. But first, what exactly do we expect to find if we're looking for a Roman legionary base? Well, in this particular time period, that is the 2nd and 3rd centuries, we are looking for something very specific, and something that does not exist at all in archaeology of the Eastern Roman Empire yet. That is a full-size, 5,000 soldier scale legionary base. We have a lot of them from the Western Empire, I'll show you in just a moment, but none of them from the East. Despite the fact that Roman archaeology in the East is quite extensive, we know a lot about the 4th century and onwards, after the Diocletianic reforms, in which Roman legions were chopped up into smaller units and distributed over larger areas. But what did a 2nd, 3rd century full-scale legionary base look like? Did they even have them in the Eastern Empire? And how might that inform how we understand the deployment of the Roman army and the administration of the empire in the East? Oh, I guess I should tell you what this is. Here you're looking at one of the temporary camps from Masada. The Romans are great because they did things very precisely and with some rigidity that we as archaeologists are happy for today. If they were on a simple march that was going to be 2 weeks, every night they would stop and assemble a temporary camp. And that temporary camp would have all of the specifications that a permanent legionary base would have, and the same specifications that a semi-permanent legionary base would have. So at Masada, where this is from, which was besieged by the Roman army for some amount of time, we have 10 or 12 of these small-scale semi-temporary camps that you can see here. And what's great about these and other ones is they all follow the same basic pattern. Yeah, we'll look at these first. Here are some examples from the Western Empire. Maybe many of these are open to tourists today, so hopefully some of you visited them. Some are very impressive, including Winebanda, which is in fact downtown Vienna today. Carnuntum in Austria, also not far away, and Novasium in Germany. There are dozens and dozens of these from this period. And you see how big they are. And if you look closely, they all pretty much look the same with only some minor changes. Let's look at a template. Here's a schematic version for you. They all have a rectangular shape, and in terms of size for these ones in the Western Empire, these are huge. These are cities themselves. This can be 500 meters by, say, 200 or 300 meters, so a small city in themselves. Surrounded by a fortification wall. What's not shown here is that often these fortification walls were further surrounded by a series of defensive trenches or moats, dry moats with all sorts of sharp things in it so the bad guys can't get in. Inside, you also see some regularity. You usually have one main road crossing in this direction about a third of the way from one of the walls. Occasionally you'll have a similar sized road another third of the way down. Between the two were the Principia and the Praetorium, the two main headquarters buildings in legionary bases. The Principia being kind of the main headquarters where the treasury would be, where the standards of the main eagles of the legion would be placed, where meetings would take place, and so on. And the Praetorium is essentially the villa of the commander. And so these two were always centrally placed in this general configuration. Another road ran axially through the long part of the camp. And these were the main roads. Within it, you have a lot of other buildings and a lot of other subsidiary roads. But you see that many of these buildings are very similar in shape. These guys here and so on. These are the barracks for the soldiers, and they are the most ubiquitous architectural element in these legionary bases. I do not know these guys. I found them on the internet, but I think they represent very nicely the ancient Romans. I tried to recruit this year, we'll be digging in just a few months, I've been trying to recruit this reenactor crowd, which is a huge community. None of them want to do archaeology. They just want to dress up, I guess. Any reenactors here? Can spread the word? No. I guess you wouldn't say it after I said all that, right? Okay. All right, so that basic template is more or less what we're looking for. And these things are so regular in the West that if we can just get a few corners of some of these buildings and a few pieces of these walls, we can kind of reconstruct the whole camp. And that was kind of the main goal. I am not a Roman archaeologist. I'm not here to make Legio a 50-year career. We are, as Gil explained, doing a much broader archaeological project. And if we can suck some important data out of Legio for the Roman period that helps us fill out that point in time, that's great. So it's nice to have the Romans on your side with this. The excavation is currently directed by three of us, myself and Yotam, who I introduced you to already, and our other colleague, Jonathan David of Gettysburg College. It's very much a joint project here. Yotam and John are the hardcore trained classicists, and I'm just in charge of stuff. But I've learned a lot along the way. So, some of our first clues in looking at, before excavation even started, in trying to understand this hill that we assumed that the Legionary base might be on, came from aerial photography. And if you look close enough, you can kind of maybe use your imagination and start to see some rectilinear features already. You see that there's some sort of long shadow here and another one over here. And if you really want, you can kind of see one here as well. So some sort of rectilinear feature that is, in fact, on the scale that we were assuming we would find. This is about 300 meters apart. We commissioned a LiDAR study of the whole valley, and in particular used it here on this particular hill. Basically means an airplane went with a giant laser and zapped the ground and gave us a bunch of high-resolution topographical data from which we can create all sorts of different models, and we can digitally reconstruct the sun at different angles across the landscape and see what comes up by looking at shadows. There have probably been lectures here in which similar concepts were used for epigraphy, shining light from different directions to read new inscriptions. So that worked out very nice for us because we were able to accentuate some of those features that we saw digitally. And rectilinear things like this don't exactly happen every day on natural landscapes. So based on all of the evidence we put together and what we could see on the ground at Legio, or from the air rather, we sort of imagined that we only have enough data to surmise that we have a couple of options for the size and shape of the camp. It could either be the size that we would expect, something like this, like the examples that I showed you before, or the data wasn't enough to say that it definitely went all the way over here and there was some topographical anomalies in this area that suggested, well, I guess it could be a smaller camp like this. Now, either option tells us something very different about how the 6th Legion was deployed here. In the larger version, we're talking about a full-scale legionary base. In the smaller version, we're talking about something smaller. So one of our main questions to answer as soon as possible was which option is the correct one. So here we are on the first day of excavations. There's Tel Megiddo in the north, and here we are on this hill. And this is Yotam here. Well, you can't tell, this is taken seconds before he started crying because he had been working and fantasizing about Legio for decades before we actually broke ground. So this is a very happy day for him when he could lay out the first squares. Some of you will understand crying on a dig site. In 2013, our goal was really to just do as much exposure as possible over the course of 2 weeks. We had a very small team. We weren't trying to do a massive excavation. We wanted to see if we can get a few pieces of evidence that would help us understand, A, if the base was in fact here, and B, if there are enough pieces that we can get to help us kind of reconstruct the overall thing and understand the size, that would help us plan for future excavations as well. So we're now here looking from the north, hovering by drone somewhere above Tel Megiddo, actually, looking southward toward the prison, which is here, over the entire field that we've just been looking at here. And as you can see from this aerial photo, this is the series of excavations that we did, which ran for approximately 100 meters across the site. Okay. Day one, easiest first day of excavation ever, and not for good reasons, unfortunately. The site was incredibly poorly preserved, very much denuded. It's been robbed out in the early 20th century and has been used as an industrial level wheat field for about 60 years. So the preservation at the site is not wonderful, but it means that we could just dust off a few centimeters of dirt before we started finding architecture. And that's good for the students. They like to see something on day one, right? Including all of these folks here. Okay, let's take a look at what we found here. I'll go through this a little bit quickly in the interest of time and get to some other things. As you can see from the drawing here, we the northern part of the excavation area was in that darker shadow area that created the first linear feature that we saw. And the reason why it was so dark in that image that you saw before is because it is in fact a depression. And so sun from a particular angle caused that to be a shadow. So up here, we're actually down inside of this trough. And as we work further to the south, we're coming up on top of the hill more. And that will help you understand a little bit of the things that we found. So here I've rotated it for you. We're down in the trough coming up onto the hill and so on. Down in the deepest part of the trough, we found a channel, a man-made channel that we now realize, as you'll see in just a moment, is part of a much larger channel that cut through the local limestone down into underlying basalt. And then further, they cut a V-shaped channel here into that basalt. Just upslope from that, about 10, 15 meters, were the remains of a large wall, about 7 meters wide. And as you can see, these are the lowest courses of this wall, which is, of course, much grander in its, in its day. And just a few fragments of it here. Altogether, we can see the defensive fortifications undoubtedly of classic Roman military style. And here you see them both in plan and section. The large wall here, down slope, cut by the Roman military down into the bottom of a channel, and a channel cut into the bottom. Now, I think, yeah, here we go. I have a couple examples for you of what this would have looked like in real life, and I think that will help. A large fortification wall with soldiers on top and that sort of thing, with these V-shaped channels down below with sharp objects and things like that. So that was great. We had and understood that within about 3 or 4 days. So that really felt good to have some progress. Just inside of this large fortification wall, we found an in situ line of pipes, which excited us very much at the time, but now we've excavated thousands of these pipe segments, so they're a little bit boring, but they are part of the water supply system that fed Roman military camp. And as many of you probably know, the Romans loved water. They brought it from everywhere. They had baths, and everybody was wet all the time. And they had toilets, and they were flushing them. They used more water than any other civilization, even us today, I think, probably. But that's good for us because they left a lot of their infrastructure in place, which we have found archaeologically, as you will see shortly. As we continue further upslope and we get inside of the larger fortification wall itself, you see, and I can represent this whole area here and beyond with just a couple of quick photographs. We didn't have a lot of horizontal exposure, but we didn't need it. We found a series of rooms, and that seemed to be typical all the way across the excavation area. Small rooms like this, maybe 3 meters by 3 meters, with various variations on that along the way. Some of them were separated by alleyways or streetways, alleyways or what did I say? Streetways carved right out of the bedrock with sewer channels built inside of them as well. Classic Roman construction, and as you'll see, the pottery and coins and everything like that pretty much secured the Roman date for these things. One of the rooms was kind of interesting in that it's a small mystery. There seemed to be a small closet at the center of which was this stone with the hole in the center, and it's not a closet that anybody would hang out in or sleep in or anything like that, so it must have been for something else. And our best guess is that maybe this is an emplacement for one of these Roman standards, for which any legionary legion would have dozens of these things for different divisions and so forth. But it's a little bit speculative. Most of the finds that we had from the inside of these rooms were roof tiles. In fact, we excavated tons and tons and tons of roof tiles. If anybody knows anyone who wants to do a dissertation on Roman roof tiles, we have a lot of them, and we will happily ship them wherever you want. Yotam insisted on keeping them all just in case such a person wanted to do such a dissertation. In any case, you see that they're ubiquitous here. They work just as many modern roof tiles do, with these trays, with the coverings on top of them, and so on. We are fortunate enough also to have many of them that were stamped with the name of the Legion. And we had several samples that were broken and only said part of the name of the Legion, and some which had a Roman numeral, but you couldn't be sure if there wasn't another I there or another V or something like that. But eventually we did find an example that had the full Legio Xth Ferrata, which is the name of the Legion that we were in fact looking for, and you're looking at that example here. Legio V, I, F, E, and then the R on top of each other. So this is, of course, every archaeologist's dream, is to have the name of the people who were at the site, or the name of the site, actually represented there. This is a nice Medusa head that was probably one of these decorative elements on the end of the roof tiles. Some other objects, these scales from a scale armor, which is nice to see that we are definitely in a Roman military context. Of course, we had dozens and dozens of coins and lamps. These peculiar features, these are lead ingots of some sort, not the kind of ingots that we know very well from the Roman Empire, which are kind of long and they have nice stamps on them. But these are apparently probably melted down from local objects intended to be reused by soldiers themselves, kind of on an ad hoc basis. Preliminary analysis of the lead here suggests they might come from Sardinia, which is a known location of Roman lead mining. This was one of our nicer finds from this season in 2013, which is this nice feline sculpture, which is probably part of a tripod table, which is nice. We also found perhaps the last Roman soldier from Legio. Almost didn't find him at all. Here we have part of a room, which is only partially excavated one corner, with a rock kind of leaning up against one of the walls. And we were originally not going to bother with this because the rock was really heavy and it didn't matter. We were there to get a few pieces of information and the rock wasn't one of them. Eventually we decided to move it and found that this rock was covering the entrance to a cave, which we very quickly excavated and found that there was one lone Roman soldier in a cremation burial buried inside of it. It was probably one of the, well, here he is here. Other things which were kind of surprising, we had numerous fragments of these Kalal Jewish ritual vessels from just this small excavation at the camp. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Romans were also Jewish, but clearly there was some sort of exchange with the local Jewish population, and the Romans were using these for who knows what. But there are a number of them there, and there'll be an interesting study once we continue and put them together. Farthest upslope, we had yet another larger road cut out of bedrock, not large enough to be one of these major roads of the camp, but it also had a number of sewer channels connected to it and additional architecture as well, which also produced numerous roof tiles and things like that. So that was great. At the end of the 2013 season, we were sure that we had identified the location of the camp, which feels good. We had a good understanding, we think, of its configuration, more or less in the landscape. We had the defensive structure. We had a lot of these smaller chambers, which almost certainly are part of some, and statistically, almost certainly part of some of these barracks structures. And we had a couple of larger roads, which probably indicate some of these kind of larger alleyways in between. We didn't quite have that piece of evidence that would help us understand if we were dealing a small camp or a larger camp. So we went back. In 2015, we held our first larger scale season. Not too large, we had about 50 people. This is the staff and volunteers. It's funny, it's like when you show your pictures of your kids to people that don't really care, archaeologists are always showing pictures of their team to people. So, just struck me then. In 2015, we opened up 2 new excavation areas, areas B and C, which were meant sort of an ad hoc decision because there was a major drainage channel from the local winter rains which were severely eroding this part. And so we thought, well, if we're going to dig anyway, we might as well try to protect some of those things. And another part, we were interested in getting some of the central architecture of the camp. So this was a good opportunity. Further, area C was strategically placed so that if you imagine the smaller version of the camp here, C would catch the defensive wall on that side based on everything we thought we knew at that time. And if it did, great. If not, then it might suggest that we had the larger camp. Let's look at area C first. Both of these areas were very productive and exciting, so I'll just let you in on that ahead of time. Not because they had beautiful monumental architecture, giant inscriptions, but because they gave us just those couple of clues we needed to better reconstruct the overall layout of the camp. And here in Area C, you get your best example of that. It doesn't look like much, but if we zoom in, and I help you understand what you're seeing here, you see that we're looking in red at 2 foundation walls for a large road system. A road that's about 8 meters wide, the center of which had a deep sewage channel in it. Now all of this would have been covered nicely with stone, and the sewage channel would be lined with stone and have these beautiful caps on it, but all of that has been robbed away, and you're looking only at the substructure of the road itself. If we reconstruct the length of that road, you can see it here going through Area C all the way towards the end of the camp. Now this is a major road. As I said, it's about 8 meters wide, almost certainly one of the major roads that cross the camp. And once we had this, we knew with 90% certainty that we were probably dealing with the large size of the camp, and this was the main, in this case, north-south road through it. On the east side of the road, we had a number of very nice structures. We just don't know much about them at all. But on the west side of the road, severely destroyed, but we had clear evidence for monumental architecture. Here's some examples of roads, if that helps your imagination. As I said, on the west side, we identified some big chunks of monumental architecture, not the normal stuff for barracks or anything like that. In fact, now that we have, looking at our schematic here, now that we have this main road through here and we can understand where we are in the whole scheme of things, this monumental architecture almost certainly belongs to the Principia, the large headquarters building that would have been near the center of the camp. And that was a very nice piece of data to have. A couple other shots of some of this architecture. Again, not very well preserved, but the data you get from that one datum point of where you are on the map is more valuable sometimes than finding the gold, and, well, sometimes. So in addition to these large monumental walls, here and here, we also had evidence for at least 2 column bases which would have fronted the main road. And that's great because we know very well what these Principia look like, and they are situated right there on the main road. They do have beautiful facades with columns on them, and they do have large-scale monumental architecture. So here you see one example reconstructed from the Novi in Poland. Here the main road coming through, and here you see the facade of the Principia with its column bases and other large-scale architecture. Another feature of the Principia is this larger structure which usually spans the main road. This is called the Groma. This is a monumental structure that very much marks the center of the camp in a lot of ways. And quite literally, the Groma actually refers to the surveyor's peg, which would have been placed at the main surveying location, and all the edges of the camp surveyed from this particular point. Okay, so we have the main road. We have the defensive fortifications, and we still have one, and the Principia, and we have one other area to look at, which is Area B, just to the west. Similar situation, not great preservation, but a few good clues. First of all, as I've outlined for you in red, we have another road. It's really shabby, and there are only fragments of it, but just enough. And you know, today all of the main utilities that are supplied to the city all run underneath the main roads, right? Electrical, plumbing, and so on. Same is true for the Romans. The first inkling that we had a road here was the fact that all of these water supply pipes were running just under what would have been the main stone covering. Over on this side, we found remains of terracing, which would have supported the road. Much of the camp was kind of built on a slope, and so a lot of the buildings and roads themselves were partially terraced up and so forth. Some of these water pipes for you. On the south side of the road, we found more monumental scale architecture. So we knew again that we weren't dealing with the common barracks level of the camp, but something a little bit nicer. Here I've outlined some of the walls for you. Not enough to get a fantastic idea of the plan, but it's just inside of this road. There are fragments of door thresholds and jambs here, and so forth. But what was nicest, the best preserved, was this larger room that you see here, which we'll look at now, which turned out to be a latrine, which is really cool. Especially when the kids come to visit and you want to show them what contribution you're making to understand the ancient world. You take them and show them the toilet. But it's not just any toilet, I will tell you. It is probably the toilet used by the camp commander. That's right. It was beautiful, really. It had these ceramic tiles in the floor. And here you see the main commode itself. What you're missing from this particular image is the toilet seat, which has long since been robbed away, and looking therefore down into the sewage channel below. Here you see it from a slightly different angle. So if you need the visual, you can imagine one of these toilet seats covering this part here. Your feet are resting comfortably here. Your arm is probably resting here with your latest tablet, newspaper, what have you. And it's big enough, I must say, that it was probably a double-seater. It also featured what was probably not actually a unique thing in ancient toilets, but a unique find from an archaeological point of view, is this sewer pipe here, which would have allowed water to be poured down underneath the toilet seat so you can flush. And of course, there would have been running water underneath at all times anyway, so that's nice. Some other views for you, and so on. Okay, so all of these pieces of data help us put together a very nice architectural story here. We have defensive structure, we have Principia, we have a main road, and these main roads inevitably lead to the defensive walls, at which point you would expect to find large gate structures. Here are a couple of examples of the types of gates that would come from this types of legionary bases. Not small things at all. We're hoping this year we'll be going back to this area to see about the gate. The gates are nice because they're monumental architecture, and who doesn't like that? But they're also the best chance to find inscriptional material related to the founding of the camp. Inscriptions saying, and such an emperor on such and such a date set up the Sixth Legion here, and so on. Because one of our outstanding questions is, when was the base actually established? We also have evidence for a very nice building near a main road that fits very nicely with the probable location of the praetorium, the commander's residence, and his toilet, of course. We did a little bit of ground-penetrating radar work just in the last 5 minutes of the last season, which will form the basis of this summer's work in between these two areas. And in fact, what we kind of get an inkling of here, and I'll just interpret it for you, is this is the continuation of this main road here, and a large open area inside, which probably represents part of the Principia as well, because the Principia is essentially a two-part structure with a large open courtyard and a basilica-type building in the back. So it's nice to have this additional data to help out. So if we plot and extend all of the roads that we now understand and so forth, we can kind of get an image, something like this. We're pretty sure at this point that we have the full-scale legionary base, which is the first time that we can say with any certainty that the Eastern Empire had full-scale legionary bases. And probably, and this will be of interest to those who work in Jerusalem in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries, probably the 10th Legion also had a full-scale legionary base. This image was done by our drone team just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm happy to show it because it happened to be just the right moment in the barley growing season in which we could see a lot of underground structures, and I can zoom in for you. You can see area B and C here, but you can see very nicely now the northern fortification wall, the western one, which we could never really see before, the southern one here. And if you see these linear lines in here, that's the continuation of that basalt trough inside of the moat, which we can now extend all the way across here. And there are a bunch of other features that we're able to make out, and hopefully we'll be exploring some of those this summer. Okay, back to Armageddon, because I know you've been waiting to find out what the story is here. And the story that you would always get, especially from the tour guides at Megiddo, who didn't even know Legio was here, Romans were here at all, just this Iron Age and Bronze Age site. Well, of course, the end of the world is going to start here at Megiddo, because this was the crossroads of empires, and of course it's the most logical place for a final battle, and there were so many battles fought here over thousands and thousands of years, so of course they would choose this. All very unsatisfying suggestions for how Megiddo would be associated with the penultimate battle. So the question on the table now is, why then would Megiddo be associated with this? Let's think now in terms of what is underlying the book of Revelation. Let's strip away all of the theology for just a moment. You can have it back when we're done. and try to understand what is really at the kernel, from an historical point of view, behind the book. And what is behind that is rebellion. Rebellion against Rome, the kicking out of the Romans and independence for the Jews and possibly the Christians in Israel. That is what inspires all of the imagery in the book. And so now, suddenly, now that you understand that there's a major Roman legionary base here, you can understand just the simple, pure strategy behind this. If you're Bar Kokhba, for example, and you're going to kick the Romans out, you really have two objectives, and you have to do them in the following order. Eventually, at the end, you have to kick the 10th Legion out of Jerusalem. But before that, you got to kick out their reinforcements from Legio, from Megiddo, here, and start the whole process. So that is why Megiddo, it's not Megiddo itself, it's the legionary base that is the site of the penultimate battle. So I'll leave you with that, I think. No more slides. Yeah, you can check out our website if you want or not. Thank you all for coming and for listening.